Your manager applauded you in private. Then the meeting started and somehow your name disappeared. The compliment came after hours, usually on Slack. The public credit kept landing on louder, less careful coworkers. What you're experiencing has a name. It's reputational sidelining, and competent women often mistake it for a communication problem. In the next 11 minutes, I'll decode this. You'll hear why it happens, how it spreads, and what to watch. The first sign appears before any confrontation. Your access shrinks, updates arrive later, and visibility quietly narrows. But the second stage cuts deeper. That's when praise becomes containment, and most women still think they're being supported. You notice it during status meetings first. Your work is referenced indirectly, while someone else becomes the face attached. 1 week, you're essential for cleanup and deadlines. The next week, you're suddenly outside the conversation that shapes direction. Your manager still says you're invaluable, but invitations change, skip-level exposure drops, and your ideas arrive through other mouths. If this sounds like you're weak, you're not paranoid. You're recognizing a pattern before the paperwork catches up. Imagine this. Monday's meeting starts, your deck is used, and the director thanks the team without once saying your name. Later, your manager messages, "Great job today." That private praise isn't reward, it's often a pressure valve. It keeps you calm without changing your standing. It soothes the injury while preserving the same public hierarchy. Another scene looks softer but lands harder. You're called dependable, but succession planning somehow never seems to include you. Reliable women are often used as organizational shock absorbers. They carry pressure, absorb mess, and make unstable managers look competent. So why does this happen so consistently? Because public credit is not just recognition. It's a signal about power. Private praise costs almost nothing. Public endorsement redistributes status, and insecure managers treat status like a limited internal budget. They will borrow your competence without sharing your visibility. That arrangement works beautifully for them and quietly erodes your future. What look like kindness is often control. They keep you motivated privately while preventing reputational acceleration publicly. In calibration meetings, your output may be acknowledged, but your presence, tone, or collaboration style becomes the balancing language. Those words sound neutral on paper. Inside organizations, they're often code for limiting a woman without attacking her results. The mechanism depends on contradiction. You must feel valued enough to keep performing, yet uncertain enough to stop pushing. That's why the messaging feels split. Your one-on-ones sound warm, while your promotion cycle starts developing strange fog. But here's what makes this worse. The bypass rarely begins with criticism. It begins with selective withholding. You stop hearing about high-visibility work early. A reorg is whispered about, stakeholder meeting happens, decisions move elsewhere. Nobody announces the exclusion because announcement creates evidence. Silence is cleaner, deniable, and much harder to challenge without sounding reactive. This is where Slack becomes revealing. Threads continue without tagging you, and summaries appear after choices were already made. In hybrid work, distance makes this easier. The hallway conversation becomes strategy, and the Zoom invite becomes theater. Return to office policies can sharpen the same pattern. Visibility gets framed as spontaneity, while exclusion hides inside organic collaboration. Competent women often blame themselves at this stage. They think maybe they missed a cue or spoke too directly. But the pattern isn't random confusion. It's often image management designed to preserve existing loyalty structures and comfort levels. A manager may genuinely admire your work. She can still sideline you publicly if your competence destabilizes her own narrative. Another manager may fear comparison altogether. Publicly backing you raises questions about why he needed so much cleanup from you. What you thought was inconsistency is actually strategy. Private praise secures output. Public bypass protects the person above you. And coworkers sometimes participate for simpler reasons. They can sense who gets shielded, who gets exposed, and where safety lives. So they echo the publicly favored voice. Not because it's best, but because alignment often outranks accuracy inside political teams. You see this in performance reviews too. Output becomes one category, but perception quietly becomes the category that decides movement. A woman can exceed targets and still stall. Someone writes that she's strong, though occasionally intimidating in cross-functional settings. Notice how that sentence works. It concedes competence while creating emotional caution around rewarding her with more authority. The hidden message is brutally clear. You're useful enough to keep, but not yet safe to advance. Tell me in the comments if you've seen this. The private compliment and public bypass almost always travel together. Maybe it happened during promotion season. Maybe it followed a boundary, a disagreement, or your return from PTO reset. I want to know where you first recognized it. Was it Slack silence, meeting exclusion, or review language that shifted? And if you've ever heard you're doing great while losing visibility, say that plainly below. Because naming the pattern out loud matters. Then we can return to the mechanism underneath it. The next layer is the most painful one. Competence can increase your workload faster than it increases your authority. Once you're known as steady under pressure, unstable teams route emotional labor toward you without naming it. You become the person who fixes tone, smooths conflict, trains newcomers, and catches mistakes before leadership notices. Here's the trap. The more invisible value you provide, the easier it becomes to bypass you publicly. Public recognition usually follows visible ownership, not invisible stabilization. Women are often assigned the second and judged against the first. Imagine this. Your coworker presents the cleaned version of work you salvaged at midnight, and leadership sees polished confidence. So your reputation becomes quiet and internal. Helpful, strong, reliable, but somehow not strategic or leader-shaped. That distinction is lethal during talent reviews. Organizations promote projected authority, especially when the system is already under stress. During layoffs or RIF, the same logic intensifies. Leaders protect narratives, not just output, because narratives stabilize panic. The woman known for hard truths can become vulnerable, not because she's wrong, but because she disrupts the calming story. A publicly favored peer may survive longer. He feels easier to defend in succession planning, even with weaker results. This is where many women start overfunctioning. They think more excellence will finally force honest recognition. But excellence without positioning often deepens extraction. You become harder to replace operationally while remaining easy to sideline symbolically. That's why the private compliment can feel almost insulting. Somewhere in you, the math no longer adds up. The praise arrives exactly where it cannot help. It touches your feelings while bypassing the structures deciding your future. If you're hearing, "You're such a rock," pause. Rocks get built on, they don't always get advanced. Another sign appears when feedback becomes strangely atmospheric. Nobody memes a missed metric, yet your image suddenly needs managing. You hear phrases like, "be more collaborative," or "bring people along," even when you've carried half the team. This is where the pattern reveals itself. Vague feedback is often reputational fencing, not developmental support. Specific feedback can be answered. Vague feedback forces you to defend your personality, and that battlefield almost never ends. So use language that slows the blur. "I want to make sure I understand. Could you clarify the metric?" Another useful line is quieter. Say, "Thanks for the feedback, I'll think about it," and buy yourself time. When the message feels slippery, preserve the record. "Can you put that in writing for me?" Watch how people react to that request. Honest managers usually clarify. Political managers suddenly become much less certain. You can also say, "I'll check my notes and circle back." That sentence protects you from rushed admissions. And when timing is manipulative, use this. "I prefer to discuss this when we have more time." But here's the deeper cut most women miss. Private praise can be used to pre-frame your silence. If you later object, you look hard to satisfy. After all, didn't your manager support you so generously? That is why image management beats open conflict. It creates plausible innocence around a pattern that keeps repeating. So, what should you watch for early? Not just criticism. Watch the flow of information, sponsorship, and named ownership. Ask yourself who speaks your name when you're absent. Reputation is built in rooms you never enter. Notice whose mistakes get softened publicly. Then notice whose competence gets individualized privately and depersonalized in group settings. Pay attention to meeting choreography. Who gets agenda time, follow-up visibility, and the role of cleanup resource. Watch your manager during executive moments. Does your work become our team's effort only when senior leaders are listening? The defense move at this stage is documentation, not for drama, but for pattern recognition and future leverage. Keep records of scope changes, project ownership, review language, and who was present when decisions moved. Say the Slack message praising your work, then compare it against who was credited in the meeting recap. This is not obsession. It's a counterweight against systems that privilege impression over sequence and memory. If a performance review shifts tone unexpectedly, ask calmly, which examples are shaping this assessment most strongly? Then wait. Silence after that question often reveals more than the answer people finally choose to offer. Another awareness point matters during reorgs. Power often resets quickly, and old quiet exclusions can become official structures. Watch where your manager places you after change. Are you near decision paths or near only execution paths? During a promotion cycle, ask different questions. Not, am I doing well, but what public evidence supports my advancement? That wording matters because advancement is social proof. Strong work alone rarely survives calibration without visible sponsorship. The next sign is the one most women miss. Access to your labor rises while access to power falls. Senior leaders may suddenly want your help on urgent work, yet your title, scope, and decision rights remain strangely unchanged. That pattern feels flattering at first, then burnout arrives and you realize visibility without authority is just higher stakes extraction. Guard your boundaries without announcing a rebellion. Strategic calm works better than emotional overexposure in political environments. You can say, happy to help, what should shift off my plate? That turns invisible expansion into an explicit trade. Or say, to do this well, I'll need clarity on ownership. Watch whether clarity appears or avoidance deepens. If they want your labor but resist naming authority, believe that. Ambiguity is often the mechanism, not an accident. And if the pattern continues through reviews, projects, and reorgs, widen your lens. The issue may be structural, not temporary. Sometimes survival intelligence means staying alert. Sometimes it means preparing an exit before the next calibration locks your story. So don't wait for HR to validate what you know. HR protects institutional process before it protects personal reality. The final reveal is uncomfortable but clarifying. Private praise often means they trust your competence, not your public assent. They want your steadiness near the engine. They just don't want your name competing with the people already driving. Once you see that, the confusion loosens. You stop treating mixed signals like misunderstanding and start reading structure. You also stop begging vague feedback to become useful. Not every unclear message is a growth opportunity. Some messages are simply containment, wearing a professional face. And once you recognize that, your choices become cleaner. Look at your workplace honestly this week. Where are you heavily relied on but lightly named? Tell me in the comments what shifted first: the credit, the access, the tone, or the invitations. If this gave language to something you've been living, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because the most dangerous office patterns are rarely the loud ones. They are the polished ones. And the moment you stop mistaking private praise for public power, the room gets easier to read.